Some big moves happened around the National Football League on Tuesday that shed a light on what the Washington Commanders have already done and could still do moving forward. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, everybody, to today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's suite of sites, also covering the Washington Commanders this season for WUSA9.com. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. I appreciate you coming through today. Every day, as I appreciate you, especially for coming through every single day to check out your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode. We're going to catch up with the Washington Commanders and New York Giants since they last faced each other in week 2 of this NFL season. We're going to look at some week 9 key elements for this weekend's divisional game, but we're also going to start this episode by talking about some remaining trade options as NFL trades continue to happen across the league. Hopefully not until this episode comes out. Please let somebody that we're going to talk about here still be available by the time this episode publishes. Of course, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can get a big return on FanDuel. New customers, you place a $5 bet, and if that $5 bet wins, you'll get $150 in bonus bets. Again, your first $5 bet for new customers. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. For multiple reasons, this week's early news coming across the wire Monday, Tuesday, mostly Tuesday, are a sign of why the Commanders have done some things really well from a roster standpoint, but they still certainly have some work to do. I think when everybody looks at this Washington Commanders roster, for the most part, like Adam Peters' approval rating, to use a term that's very much in the news these days, through the roof. Dan Quinn's approval rating, through the roof. I think everybody likes what's going on with the Washington Commanders. Everybody likes what's going on with this roster. And you certainly see the potential. You certainly see the future behind it. But there are obviously still holes, and there are positions that need to be secured. Some of them simply because you got guys on one-year contracts, right? You've got players who may not be here next year for one reason or another. Some of it's going to be financial. Some of it's going to be purpose-driven, right? They don't necessarily fit completely with what the team is trying to do. But when you look at what they've already done, there's some really good signs to remain confident. Because I know there's a lot of Commanders fans kind of edgy, and like every time a Deontay Johnson gets traded from the Carolina Panthers to the Baltimore Ravens, like, oh man, like why couldn't my team do that? Or every time an offensive tackle like Cam Robinson gets traded from the Jaguars to the Vikings, oh man, why couldn't my team do that? So here's some reasons why you should be appreciative. Well, I don't say should because I think you are, but here's a reason to be confident in what the Commanders have already done. And then I'm going to give you some names to keep an eye on as the trade market continues to run through all the way to November 5th, which is the deadline next Tuesday for the NFL. For starters, we're going to start not with the trade, but we're going to start with one move that isn't so much of a surprise, but really still sent some shockwaves through the NFL, and that is Indianapolis Colts quarterback Anthony Richardson being benched. Now, in their Week 8 matchup against the Houston Texans, Anthony Richardson tapped his helmet, pulled himself off the field, something that I have never seen a quarterback do in person, on television, or otherwise. After the game, he was asked about that and admitted, and he said, I'm not going to lie, which I think we should all appreciate that Anthony Richardson is not going to lie to the media. But this is honestly one of the reasons people lie to the media, because Anthony Richardson said, I was tired. I went out. I told coach, I need a breather. I need a break. And he has subsequently been absolutely roasted for it by fans, by media, by former players, all that stuff. And now he's been benched. Now, I don't think he's been benched specifically for that action. I think that action and the negative PR that's come with it is kind of just the final straw that led the Colts to benching him. Now, if you want my full takes on Anthony Richardson and the Indianapolis Colts, check out Wednesday afternoon's episode of Locked On NFL. I go into that with Tony Wiggins, but I'm not going to get into that here. Jordan Love injured for the Green Bay Packers. What these two scenarios show you, the Green Bay Packers already learned this once already. The Cleveland Browns learned this last year with Joe Flacco, who's going to replace Anthony Richardson as the starting quarterback in Indianapolis, is that it is incredibly important to have an experienced and competent backup. There's a backup quarterback. There is an old saying that says if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. And to a certain extent, that's true. But if you have the right quarterbacks, you can have two quarterbacks and still have a good quarterback scenario. You look at the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know what Justin Fields is feeling behind the scenes, but at least in the public eye and at least from the way the team looks to be from a cohesion standpoint, he's doing the right thing, which is a great thing for him. stand up for him. It's going to endear him in the eyes of a lot of NFL franchises, especially one next year that may not feel like they're going to go get one of the top quarterbacks in the draft. And Justin Fields is a free agent. Jordan Love, they go out and they get Malik Willis to be his backup. Now, I was like a lot of people, and I kind of laughed when they went out and got Malik Willis. This is going to be your backup quarterback. This is going to be the guy that you come in to have to replace your injured starting quarterback. But they made it work. They had a plan for him. The plan worked. And hey, I'm happy for Malik. He's a good dude. Got to know him just a little bit in the pre-draft process, but he's a really good dude. Anthony Richardson, replaced by Joe Flacco. We already saw what Grandpa Joe did for the Cleveland Browns last year. It's really awkward for me to say that because I'm older than Joe Flacco, but it is what it is. So they have a plan there to do that. It is incredibly important in today's NFL. You've got one here where you're benching a guy for mostly mental performance reasons. You got one here where you're losing a guy potentially to injury, and you got other situations where you're losing guys to inconsistent play. The Washington Commanders, fortunately, knock on wood, don't have any of those situations. But if they do, they already know from the one game they had to roll with Marcus Mariota. Granted, it was against Carolina Panthers, but we can make this thing work if we need to. So incredibly important, key, clutch. Jayden Daniels has talked about how much Marcus Mariota has helped him as well. So the fact that Marcus Mariota is on this roster, something that people should be really appreciative of right now. Also, as we're recording this on Wednesday and dropping this episode October 30th, Marcus Mariota's birthday. So if you see him, wish him a happy birthday. The other situation, Stephon Diggs, Houston Texans wide receiver, suffered a torn ACL. He's out for the season, but the Houston Texans have Nico Collins, their true blue number one wide receiver, coming back week 10 expectedly. They also have Tank Dell. This is somewhere where the Washington Commanders potentially could need to do a little bit of work, because you lose Stephon Diggs and you're like, all right, we're getting Nico Collins back. First of all, you lost Nico Collins for a while, and you said, okay, at least we have Stephon Diggs, we have Tank Dell. You had weapons for your young quarterback that you felt confident in. Look, if we lose one of them, again, knock on wood, it doesn't happen, we feel comfortable with the group we have moving forward. Now, I love what the Washington Commanders have been able to do offensively, and I think when you look at the conversations we've had about Noah Brown, about Olamide Zaccheaus, about De'Ami Brown, Luke McCaffrey, kind of this group number 2 effort. Zach Ertz obviously out there as a tight end. You really like what's happening. I'm a big fan of Noah Brown. I think the Houston Texans right now are really wishing that they hadn't released Noah Brown. But if Terry McLaurin were to go down, again, knock on wood, are we as confident in this Washington Commanders receiver group as the Houston Texans can be in their wide receiver group to be able to survive that type of a loss? I don't think that they are. And that is one of the areas where the Washington Commanders have to make moves. Now, look, you can't expect a team to just completely revamp their entire roster and be secure in every spot in one season. So that's not what I'm saying here. So don't take this as a criticism. But when we come to identifying spots on the roster where this team can still make moves to improve it, to strengthen it, this is certainly one of those positions. Deontay Johnson is not necessarily going to come in here and be a Terry McLaurin replacement if that situation were to arise, but he certainly makes that receiver group stronger and more capable of withstanding something like that. So the fact that they didn't go get him does hurt a little bit just from that standpoint, but not in such a way that you should say, oh man, well, Adam Peters is dropping the ball. Some potential players that are available near the trade deadline, according to NFL.com insiders, include Jets wide receiver Mike Williams, who I don't necessarily think completely gives you that security that like a Nico Collins instead of Stephon Diggs or Stephon Diggs instead of Nico Collins does, but he is a good piece. He's a good part he brings a little bit of a dynamic to this team that they don't necessarily have. So if he's available for the right price, and Adam Peters and Dan Quinn are interested in injecting a little bit of new life into this receiver group, because again, it's hard when you look at a group that you say they've done really well. If you inject a new person into that room, you could make them better, but you could also make them worse. You could also disrupt the chemistry. So it's really touchy situation. So I don't know if they do that, but I think he's probably the most likely if there is a receiver that the Washington Commanders might bring in before the trade deadline. Of course, a lot of you guys want edge presence. You want a pass rusher, Browns defensive end or outside linebacker, edge rusher, ZaDarius Smith. He's a veteran. He's a straight up mercenary. Personally, I don't think that this team is in mercenary position. I don't think this team is going out there saying we need some mercenaries to just get us a championship ring. And you almost run the situation of overstaffing your roster for 1 year, making it better than it actually is, and actually compromising your draft capabilities in the future, if that makes sense. Wouldn't hate the move by any means. I just don't know that I see this team fully in the window where you go out and you'll get yourself a mercenary cornerback. Greg Newsome, also from the Cleveland Browns, is someone that has drawn some interest and that the NFL.com insiders are reporting might be available. He is a guy that you could look at as more of a long-term guy, young cornerback, first-round pick of the Cleveland Browns a few years back. J.C. Horn. If you're an everydayer, you already know this. J.C. Horn is my dream pick. to be a trade candidate. The Carolina Panthers are reportedly not having a fire sale, even though they just traded Deontay Johnson. They've traded some really good pieces. J.C. Horn is under contract for next year. So if the Carolina Panthers feel like they are close to being competitive, which they might feel like that, they would make a lot of sense for them to keep him. However, if he's available, especially with the price tag that he has next year, I think it's like $12 million or so on the fifth-year option. So it's a pretty expensive young player trade for whoever brings him on. You might be able to get him for a low amount. Again, I've kind of floated out like a 6th-round pick, straight up. Or if the Carolina Panthers are willing to wait a year, go 6th-round pick in 2026, that becomes a 5th if he gets re-signed by the Washington Commanders, things like that. So outside of J.C. Horn, outside of Greg Newsome, another cornerback, the NFL.com insiders are reporting is available. Patriots cornerback Jonathan Jones, NFL.com says, quote, the Patriots have signaled their willingness to sell ahead of the deadline, and Jones, being an impending free agent, is a solid candidate to move. The 31-year-old veteran would bring savvy to the back end of the Commanders' defense, end quote. So that he's kind of a mercenary, kind of a one-year rental most likely, but if that's somewhere that the Washington Commanders want to shore up early in the process, they can certainly go out there and do that potentially with Jonathan Jones. So options still available. A lot of players off the board, but options certainly still available for the Washington Commanders if they want to improve their roster for the back half of the season. Of course, the back half of the season is going to get started this next week, week 9 of the NFL schedule, up against the New York Giants. Our first look at the next opponent for the Washington Commanders coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Built Rewards. And look, we've all been there, feeling like we're burning cash with those rent checks. It's frustrating, isn't it? But here's the deal. Built Rewards has figured out a way to make rent more rewarding. Say goodbye to the money bonfire and hello to a renter's revolution with Built. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent. Every month, pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. Use those points to jet off on a dream vacation. Maybe you put them towards a flight or a hotel. With 500 plus airlines, 700,000 plus hotel and property options. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes, redeem them towards a future rent payment. They're designed to meet your lifestyle. Pay rent hassle-free through the Built Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Built points have been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Point Guys and Bankrate. So earn points by paying rent now when you go to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL. That's JOINBILT.com/LockedOnNFL. Make sure to use our URL so they know that we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL to start earning points with your rent payments today. The Washington Commanders and the New York Giants have changed in some very significant ways since they last saw each other in week 2. We're going to dive into some of those changes, what they mean, all starting with key elements of this weekend's game ahead of our crossover Thursday episode with Patricia Traina that will be dropping tomorrow. And if you want to get even more out of the Locked On Commanders podcast, sign up to be an insider today at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. From there, you can text me. I'm going to text you. You're going to get bonus content, inside information, and invitations to our exclusive insider-only Zoom conferences where you go one-on-one with me. Well, in a group session. We go one-on-one with each other, Commanders fans and myself, talking about everything that's going on. It's free for the first 2 weeks when you sign up, so come check it out. If you like it, stick around. If you don't, I appreciate you giving it a try in the first place. Key elements of this weekend's game where the Washington Commanders will visit the New York Giants. We are headed to New Jersey. Week 2, the New York Giants came down here. They took home a loss. The Washington Commanders are hoping to go up to New Jersey and bring home a win. This time around, advance to 2-0 in the division, 7-2 on the year, which would firmly put them over that 6.5 preseason win-loss over-under number, which would be great to see this early in the schedule. Some key elements to this weekend's game as I look at these two teams and what's changed since they last saw each other. The Commanders' defense is allowing 66.3% completion percentage versus 11 personnel packages. That's the 6th highest, and they've allowed the 6th highest passer rating against 11 personnel looks. But the boom percent, the amount of plays that are gaining more than one expected point added per play, is pretty solid. They're keeping that pretty low, so not giving up a lot of boom plays. They're 7th best in the league in their bust percentage, which is 7th best in the league in boom percentage rather, which is good. And then sixth best in the league in bust percentage, which is good as well. So even though there's a good amount of completions, again, ideally quarterbacks want to aim for 70% completion rate. So 66.3% completion rate, not that terrible. The sixth highest passer rating against obviously isn't great. But again, as long as you're forcing these Giants to extend drives, you're not giving them these boom plays and you're busting more plays than you aren't. That's going to bode well against that 11 personnel package, which we'll talk about here in a minute. The New York Giants like to use quite often. The Commanders' defense is also allowing 4.7 yards per carry against zone runs. That's most in the NFL. They're allowing 2.8 yards per carry after contact against zone runs, which is fourth most in the NFL. Now, the New York Giants have an injury situation that we're monitoring. That's going to impact, obviously, that whole category of this game. But it is an interesting thing to keep note of that the Washington Commanders defense, we've all kind of talked about how the run defense hasn't necessarily stood up all the time or in multiple games this season, but specifically against what this New York Giants opponent likes to do right now in the run game, because that's different. And the last time they faced each other, the New York Giants were running a lot of gap runs. Now they've been running a lot of zone runs, and the Washington Commanders defense has been, I'd say, especially bad against those zone run looks. The injury to their running back, those going to impact that as well. The Washington Commanders on the offensive side of the ball, they're averaging 5.2 yards per carry versus 3-man fronts. That's eighth best in the National Football League, and they had that same average, 5.2 yards per carry, against 4-man fronts. That's fourth best in the NFL, and that's no surprise to a Commanders fan that's watched these Washington Commanders this season. We've talked about it plenty. The run game here for the Washington Commanders is very much a strong suit for this team. And it looks like they're going to be, from a comparative stat box, and that's where we're starting this whole thing, type of comparison, certainly something that they might be able to do well against this defense as they come through with more 3-man and 4-man fronts than they did the last time we saw this Giants defense. Commanders are completing 73.1% of their passes against 4-man rushes. That is the best completion rates in the National Football League. They're sixth in yards per attempt against 4-man rushes, and they're fifth best in sack percentage against 4-man rushes. And of course, if we're talking about it, it's because the New York Giants like to bring a lot of 4-man rushes. And Jayden Daniels still one of the best against the blitz, top 15 against the blitz overall, top 5 offensive grade against the blitz because of his wheels, second best run grade as a quarterback against the blitz. So you blitz Jayden Daniels, you do so at your own peril. The Giants injury to watch, of course, is running back Tyrone Tracy Jr., the rookie who has really kind of burst onto the scene here for the Giants. Suffered a concussion in the Monday night loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers, so he entered into concussion protocol on Tuesday. And in today's NFL world, with the way concussions work and the way the concussion protocol works, it's really hard to come back from a concussion the next week after the week you suffered it. We saw Brandon Coleman, Washington Commanders offensive tackle, suffer concussion against Carolina Panthers, wasn't even close to being cleared to play against the Chicago Bears this last weekend. We'll see how he does this week moving towards the New York Giants. But Tyrone Tracy Jr. not expected to play this weekend. Of course, the first injury report coming out Wednesday afternoon will be very important for that one, depending on what he's able to do, what he's not able to do. 11 personnel usage does go down when the New York Giants have Devin Singletary, so that kind of impacts a little bit of the key elements we were just talking about. 12 personnel usage goes down as well. Shotgun usage goes down when with Singletary in motion, goes up with Devin Singletary on the field. Middle of the field passes drop 11%. Right side of the field passes go up 9%. Left side runs drop by 2%. Right side runs increase by 9%. So right side passes, right side runs go up with Devin Singletary. Middle of the field passes drop 11, 12 personnel usage goes down because, again, Devin Singletary is not as physical as a back as Tyrone Tracy can be, I should say, not necessarily has established himself. Devin Singletary, much more of a one cut type of back, much more of an agile type of, I don't call him a scat back, but kind of scat backish type of guy. And that typically doesn't threaten the middle of the field, which means defenses can cover the middle of the field better, which is why those middle of the field passes drop as significantly as they do. So if you have Devin Singletary in there instead of Tyrone Tracy Jr., which is what we expect, that left side of your Washington Commanders defense, the right side of the New York Giants offense, is going to see about a 10% uptick in attention on this coming Sunday, according to current trends. Washington Commanders injury to watch, we just talked about a little bit. Left tackle Brandon Coleman in concussion protocol. We'll see how that goes this week. Left tackle Cornelius Lucas injured his ankle in the win over the Chicago Bears, so we'll have to see how he progresses as well. If neither of those guys can go right now, it would look like Trent Scott would be the guy. The Washington Commanders actually just made a couple of moves in their practice squad over the break between the two games. They released offensive tackle Aneem Dankwa from the practice squad, added offensive tackle Bobby Hart to the practice squad. I was asked by an insider, how significant of a move is this? How great is, or how good could Bobby Hart be, or is that not that great? I'll tell you right now, even a veteran, if you're looking for your practice squad for your starting left tackle, that is going to be a problem. I'm not saying that this was going to happen, but if that were to happen, that's a problem. So we'll see what happens this week with the injuries. Looking at the Giants, man, Kayvon Thibodeau primarily plays on the right side of the Giants defense, which is, of course, the left side of the Commanders offense. Brian Burns plays primary left side, but he does have 184 snaps this year at right end or right outside linebacker. Both rush the passer 90% of the time or more. They've got 7 combined sacks rather from the right side of the formation, 31 combined hurries, 9 hits. Both are top 30 in pass rush win rates. Both are top 38 among NFL defensive ends, outside linebackers, edge rushers, which you think there's 64 starters. So they're both right there, in or near the top half of the league in pass rush win rate on true pass sets, which is like your third and long pass sets and all those things. So very, very effective pass rush coming against the New York Giants, having that left tackle position solidified. Very important. So if Brandon Coleman and or Cornelius Lucas can't go, expect a lot of tight end help, expect a lot of chips, expect a lot of blocks, all those things. So we'll talk about that more as we get injury reports going through the week. But of course, we've got some changes between the Commanders and their tendencies. We've got some changes in the Giants and their tendencies. We'll talk about that as we continue our initial look at the New York Giants Washington Commanders matchup this weekend, right here on the Locked On Podcast, Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle all the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers, you can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you're watching a game, any NFL game, and in the middle of that game, you get yourself a hunch on a player performance or the overall game flow, you can go check out the latest stats. You can view the latest play-by-play and so much more on the exact same page, where you can then place your bets, or you can make bets before games, like the Washington Commanders, who are 3.5-point favorites on the road next week against the New York Giants to open the week. The largest spread of the week right now belongs to the Baltimore Ravens, who are 9.5-point favorites to beat the Denver Broncos in Baltimore with their new shiny wide receiver, Deontay Johnson, in tow. So go to FanDuel.com today and join up. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. As we continue to look at this weekend's matchup between the Washington Commanders and the New York Giants, it is important to look at where they have where they've gone rather since the last time we saw these two teams on the field together. Of course, we've been watching the Washington Commanders, who have gone 5-1 since the two teams last saw each other in week 2. The Giants have gone 2-4 since these two teams last matched up. And on the Commanders' offensive side of things, since week 2, not so much a rise of the no huddle, but more so a rise in the awareness of their no huddle offense. Obviously, the New York Giants were one of the first teams to really have to experience that. So we'll see how their experience against it helps them coming into this weekend's matchup. 11 personnel usage in Washington has dropped from 71% through week 2 to 52% since they saw each other. 12 personnel usage has increased from 20% to 28% in that same window. So you're seeing more 12 personnel, more 2 tight end sets, fewer 11 personnel, 1 tight end set. So 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends. That's how the breakdown works there. 11 and 12 personnel accounted for 91% of the offense in Washington in the first 2 weeks. Since then has accounted for 80%. And I think you can tie that directly to 1, getting to know the personnel better if you're Cliff Kingsbury, 2, opening the playbook up more, and 3, the progression of Jayden Daniels allowing you to open up those things and expand your offense as well. 13 and 21 personnel have been used more in weeks 3 to 7, with the 4th highest usage of 13 personnel. Still not a lot of 13 personnel, but as far as teams that use 13, Washington is one of the highest from weeks 3 to 7. Highest success rate coming in 21 personnel, but that only accounts for 7% of the offensive personnel groupings used from weeks 3 to 7 as well. So a lot of success when they use 21. They don't use 21% or 21 personnel all that often. No huddle usage for Washington has increased from 52% to 61%. Again, the comfortability with Jayden Daniels running it, the comfortability with Cliff Kingsbury to activate it. I think all of those things go hand in hand. Success rates on motion plays have risen 10% from 43% to 53%. That 53% success rate on plays that include motion is third best in the NFL. So this team has gotten a lot better at not only using motion, but using it to their advantage to make and create successful teams. The usage of motion has shifted from 60% on pass plays, 40% on run plays to 55-45. So you're getting more motion on run plays than you were before, which is, fairly significant. Of course, success rates as a whole have gone up just around across the board. Run game was primarily a zone rush attack, but has shifted to more of a gap run scheme and has gotten more successful as well. Jayden Daniels had zero touchdown passes. The last time these two teams saw each other, came out of that game still 0 touchdown passes for his career. Now he's at 7 and at least 1 in every single game he's played since the Giants game, not counting the Panthers game, because he only played the one possession. Passer rating has gone up from 97.2 to 106.8. That 106.8 is the fourth best in the NFL. His pressure rate has dropped about 5% as well, and he's obviously connecting much better with Terry McLaurin. Now 12 targets, 8 catches, 39 yards, no touchdowns through the first 2 games. Since then, 45 targets, 32 catches, 540 yards, 4 touchdowns. And the area that he's getting the most increase in is the yards per game, 90 yards per game right now compared to 19.5 yards per game in the first 2 weeks of the season. And that's honestly his catches. His targets have only gone up 1.5. His catches have only gone up 1.3 per game. Yet his yards production is going through the roof. So that connection is not really happening more. It's just happening more effectively. So that's really good, because if you can have it more effectively and have it happen more, then you're really onto something. Commanders defense, 30% reduction in 4-2-5 formation usage, 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, 5 defensive backs, and a 9% increase in 3-3-5 usage, 3 down linemen, 3 linebackers, 5 defensive backs. However, tendencies in the box and their shell usage, 1 high shell, 2 high shell, haven't really changed. Still primarily presenting light boxes, not as much as the rest of the league is, but near the top of the league in 7-man boxes and bottom half of the league in stacked boxes. Zone coverage usage has gone up 17% from weeks 3 to 7. Blitz rate has dropped. They blitzed 23 times in week 8, however, which is the second most they blitzed this season. So that's not definitely a week-to-week idea. I think this week against Daniel Jones, you probably blitz him a little bit more than you would guys like, say, Lamar Jackson. They've allowed a 127.6 passer rating in the first 2 weeks of the season, and since have allowed a 95.7. Still not great, but certainly much better. 1 sack per game coming into week 2 against the Giants versus 3.2 since. That 3.2 sacks per game is the 5th best rate in the NFL in that window. Run defense has gotten worse by half a yard per carry. However, again, the Giants have an injury running back that will probably impact that part of the game. So that's basically where the Washington Commanders have come since week 2. Looking at the Giants, they're using a lot more 11 personnel compared to 12 personnel. They're also using more 13 personnel than they were before. Play action usage has actually gone down, but the success rate when they do use it has gone up. And they were running 58% gap runs the last time we saw them. They're now running 60% zone runs since we saw them. So that's going to be different. And again, that zone run scheme is what this Commanders run defense actually struggles against more than the gap run defense. Giants defense was using 51% 3-man fronts. That's down to 48%. They were using 14% 4-man fronts. That's up to 27%. And they were using 22% 2-man fronts. That's now down to 17%. So basically down on 3 and 2-man fronts, up on 4-man fronts. The increase in 4-man rushes is also coming, still blitzing around 27% of the time, which all ties into, again, our key elements of this weekend's matchup between the Commanders and the New York Giants, where the Commanders are allowing a very high completion percentage against 11 personnel, allowing a 4.7 yards per carry average against zone runs, averaging 5.2 yards per carry against 3-man and 4-man fronts, and they're completing 73.1% of their passes against 4-man rushes. So some strength against strength here in this matchup. We will see who obviously comes out on top when the game happens. But before we do that, we've got 2 more episodes. Crossover Thursday with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants. She's going to give us the context behind some of these numbers that I just shared with you. And then we'll marry the numbers, we'll marry the context, and come back Friday. We'll make our final predictions and dive deeper into what we think needs to happen for the Washington Commanders to go 7-8 and 2. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text me. All you got to do is go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Become an insider today. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. The next episode of Locked On NFL will feature myself talking with Tony Wiggins, the barber, for some real NFL talk. But you can also get the morning episode with Madman Tyler Rowland, who's going to kick you off in the morning with a double shot of NFL espresso. It's the all-new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Everydayers, special thank you to you for coming through every single day. And until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.